Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Eric Brock, Director of Product Marketing at Vistara, and welcome to today's webinar on Managing Modern IT, Measuring the Success of Cloud-Based Services. Together with me today is Mahesh Ramachandran, who's our Senior Director of Product Management, and we're going to go ahead and begin the presentation. And if you have questions, please go ahead and post them in the questions area at any time, and we will address them either during the session or at the end during the Q&A period. Okay, Mahesh, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar. We're excited to talk about this topic that we see as becoming increasingly relevant as the adoption of cloud in the enterprise takes hold and becomes a mainstream way for IT to deliver IT services. So I want to start with just putting the discussion today in context, specifically around why talk about IT metrics now, why is it particularly relevant today, and what do IT metrics have to do with cloud. So I want to start with putting that in context first, and I'll then dive right into the specifics of the different types of IT metrics that are relevant in a cloud context. So I'll talk about the what and the how, and then I'll turn it over to Eric, who will talk about what you do with those metrics that I'm going to be going through. So Eric will talk more about the process and how to apply these metrics in managing IT, and I'll focus more on the nitty-gritties and the specifics of what the metrics are and how you collect them. Okay. So with that, let me just go into talking about the context of the discussion. So fundamentally, here's really what the context is. Public cloud is a new and potent force in enterprise IT, and it is currently and will increasingly so have a deep and profound influence on how enterprise IT operates. And in this specific way is how we see it playing out. The role of IT is surely but slowly changing to be more of an aggregator of IT services, sourced from a mix of private, internally delivered services, your classic IT services, email, compute, storage, network, from within your data center, and if you build a cloud, more of a private cloud type delivery model. And as well as aggregating resources from the public cloud, meaning external service providers such as Amazon or Rackspace or many others that you see today that are offering cloud-based IT resources, VM instances, bucket storage, database tables, and so on. And so we see enterprise IT really is playing the role of an aggregator of these different services from both internally provided services as well as publicly delivered services. So that's one point. And the other important implication of this is that public cloud formalizes what was heretofore somewhat informal around the quality of service delivered, the service levels delivered for these IT resources, and the cost at which these IT resources were delivered. Before public cloud, there was some organizations may have had formal service level agreements between lines of business and internal IT, but it wasn't quite as formal as what public cloud necessitates, right? So, for example, you can go to Amazon and say, I can buy a VM or a cloud instance for 6 cents an hour, and I'm going to get a high IO instance for 12 cents an hour, and it's guaranteed to give me certain IO performance, for example. So public cloud really formalizes what was so far more of an informal relationship in terms of service levels delivered to the costs that are paid by the lines of business to IT. And so enterprise IT now is forced to look at and measure and track the service levels that they're delivering relative to the cost that the business is investing in internal IT, because the public cloud sort of sets a benchmark, so to speak. So that really is the motivation for this. Enterprise IT now is required, or increasingly so will be required, to measure in very specific and tangible terms the value that IT is delivering relative to the costs that are being invested. So that both at the business level as well as at the technology level, decisions can be made around what is the best place to source resources. Should I go to the public cloud, or should I go to do I do it internally from my private cloud? And by private cloud here, I'm using the term somewhat loosely in that if you have just a classic data center based IT services, that would, or if you have what you would call a formal private cloud. Either way, I'm distinguishing between internally generated resources and resources that you can buy from the public cloud. So that's really the context. So the question is, if you accept this premise, IT metrics are important. The next question is really, what metrics should IT track? What is relevant? And that's what I'm going to talk about next year. So let's talk about the different types of metrics. So there is two types of metrics you can think about in this context. There are metrics that your end users, your lines of business can experience and see in terms of the services they're getting and the costs they're paying. So those we call service level metrics, and they have the three categories. We can put them into availability, meaning is the service up or down, performance, am I getting good response times, and then service fulfillment sort of captures more of are there other services that are management services that I'm getting from enterprise IT and others being delivered as promised. So we'll get into more details on these in a few minutes here. So those are service level metrics, and they're really more externally customer facing metrics. And then on the other side, you've got what we call service delivery metrics, which are more focused on how effectively and how efficiently IT is delivering the services to those service levels. So there's more, are you resolving problems on time? Are you responding in time to issues and incidents? And then are you utilizing your capacity efficiently? What are your services costing you? So these are more internally facing metrics that IT should be using to measure and optimize how well they're delivering to the service levels that they promised. And so I'm going to go into each of these, and then we'll have some discussion there. So let's dive right into the specifics behind these metrics. So let me start with service level metrics, those customer facing, externally facing metrics. So availability is the most basic, most fundamental metric in the service level area. It's like IT's credit score. It's the fundamental metric that establishes trust between the line of business and enterprise IT. In that, if you're delivering good availability, if my services are up when I need them, that makes for a basic quality of service measurement. What does availability actually capture? What availability captures is really the availability or up or down status of services as experienced by the end user. And to be more specific, you can think of it as a percentage of time over any interval, over a month, over a quarter, that the services are available for end users to use. And to get more specific in terms of what you would measure to get availability for servers, for example, you would measure, is a server responding to a ping, as simple as that. Or you may look at specific services within that are running inside the operating system and look at if those services are responding to your request. So this is really a very basic, simple, but extremely important metric to track if IT is run well. Network devices, you would again look at ping, or you look at the status of your interfaces, your ports. For applications, again, you look at if the web service is responding, if the application responds to your API calls. Simple, basic, is the thing responsive? Is really what goes behind measuring availability. So at the conceptual level, availability is simple. But if you get into some more, to get into some more of the practicalities of measuring availability, there are some nuances that I'd like you to be aware of. Let me just run through a few of those nuances, just to give you a sense of sort of what is involved here in accurately measuring and reporting availability. The first consideration here is, at what level do you measure availability? Do you measure it at the individual device level, or do you measure it at the availability level of an entire service? So, for example, if you look at the picture below, you've got a web app that's made up of two application servers, which are both just clones of each other, and then you've got a database. And so you may have a situation where the database is running fine and one of the app servers is running fine, but the other app server may be down. So the service is still up and running, it is still responding, but it's sort of somewhat degraded, right? And so at what level do you measure availability? When you do your weekly reports or monthly reports, do you track it at the level of an individual device, or do you look at the entire service and say, okay, what is the availability I'm delivering for the service? So in terms of, do you want to look at availability as an absolute binary quantity, is it up or down, or versus, as in the example here, if I have one app server down, I may say, well, the service is up, but it's kind of degraded, right? I'm not getting the best performance because I've got one of my app servers down. So there are some nuances in terms of, how you would measure it, and these are really choices that you need to make within IT to decide, here's how I'm going to measure it, here's the standards I'm going to use. Another aspect here is, what do you count against downtime? Meaning, when is the service not available? If you have planned activities such as patching or other upgrades, do you count the time that the device was down due to in order to patch it? Do you count that downtime against availability, or do you just sort of discount that? Right. Again, these are choices that you have to make to standardize how you measure and track availability. Moving on, the second category of service level metric has to do with performance. So this is getting more fine-grained than availability. And fundamentally, what performance measures is the service responsive to the user or to other applications that may depend on it. So, for example, if it's a database server, what is the average response time I'm getting on my queries? Or if it's a web app, what is the average response time I'm getting on my requests? So availability fundamentally captures two things, or performance captures two things. It captures what we call throughput, which is how many requests can you service at one time? Can I process 100 SQL queries per second, for example? What is the rate at which you can service requests, and then what is the latency or the response time you get on those requests? Fundamentally, at any level, these are two attributes that the performance captures. And so, if you get down to what you would measure at different levels, so for servers and cloud instances, you would measure more lower level metrics like CPU, how much time your servers spend getting your apps are spending getting CPU, waiting for CPU, or likewise with memory, are you getting lots of swaps because you just don't have enough memory? It's more lower level metrics. And at the application level, you'd measure sort of what the user sees, what response time users are getting for the requests that they're making or API calls that they're making. So I should point out that it is important to measure performance at both at the lower level, such as the server or cloud instance level, as well as the application level, because when it comes down to troubleshooting app performance issues, you need to know what performance each level in the stack is delivering. So they're both equally important, even though more on the lower level metrics, they may look a little, a little obscure. It's important to understand what performance you're getting at each level, because they all add up. And to get into some of the considerations in measuring performance, you you need to think about a few things here. So, are you focusing on the right metrics? Applications or operating systems or hypervisors, they expose literally hundreds of metrics, and only a few of them really capture the performance side of the equation and really matter. And so it's a challenge to figure out among the hundreds of metrics which ones really help you answer your question. Right? Am I getting good performance? So there's a challenge there. And also, from a statistical standpoint, you need to pick the right way to look at these performance metrics. Are you going to look at average response time, for example, or are you going to look at maximum response times, or some other measure of it? Right? If you look at average, you risk losing out on some of these. You risk losing out on outliers that are causing the outlier response times are really going to be impacting certain users. If you only focus on the outliers, you're sort of missing the big picture and missing the average. So you've got to think about what is the right balance of what's the right way you're going to measure performance. And then particularly with cloud instances, there's this tricky set of issues you need to be aware of, where in a cloud you're sort of sharing resources, infrastructure among multiple other customers, and you may get noisy neighbor issues. You may not get the resources that the cloud provider promised you. So if you look at the two charts in the bottom here, there are examples of what you could experience. Right, you've got with the I/O latency. If you've got lots of other customers running virtual machines at the same time, you may not get good I/O performance or consistent I/O performance. Likewise, on CPU, you may have been promised a large instance, but you may actually only get a small fraction of it because it's other instances crowding out resources. So just to get a good measure of whether you're getting the right resources, right performance, and the right resources it is a challenge. And there's some choices you have to make, and also you need to have good instrumentation to measure these things. Moving further here to the last category of service level metrics. Service fulfillment captures sort of more on the idea of, are you delivering for your lines of business the services that you promised them? And particularly if you've got service requests, if you have a service catalog in place where users can come and request no new virtual machines or new kinds of resources or change requests, are you fulfilling those requests in a timely manner? If you're doing patching for your lines of business, you would look at, am I patching servers when critical patches are released? So it's a general notion of, are you delivering services in a timely manner? And the metrics that you would measure to capture this would obviously depend on the specific services that you signed up for. But it's important that for each service that you're offering your end customer, you need to have a metric that captures how well you're doing against that. Right? And so it's important. This is compared to performance and availability. This is more tricky in that you need to decide on the metric based on the service that you want to track. So that really is the service level side of the equation. Representing and reporting to your end customer, your lines of business, whether you're delivering the services that you promised them well. Right? So I'm going to move on to the other side of the equation, service delivery metrics, which we looked at earlier. If you recall, the service delivery metrics capture the efficiency and effectiveness with which you are operating your shop, so to speak. Right, so let's look at some of those metrics and see what they involve. So the first category is problems, right? So if you're servicing multiple lines of business, hundreds of thousands of resources that your customers are consuming through you, from you, you need to have a solid handle on where your problems are, where your hotspots are, right? And so what problem metrics capture, the goal of problem metrics is to give you data to enable you to get insight into what the typical or the most common causes of your problems are, right? So you look at your one of the basic metrics you look at is common problem types. Am I getting, what are the most common sources of outage? Let's say for servers, right? So you look at your tickets, your problem tickets, your incident tickets, and say, of all the 100 incidents that I had in the last month, what is the most common source of problem? And that's, you mine your incident and your ticket system to get at this question. Right? Similarly, if you want to know more detailed information, you look at your OS and application error codes to look at, what is the most common cause of failure, right? What was the cause of the crash? Again, not on an individual device by device basis, but more of on a aggregate trend level basis, right? What is the overall aggregate data telling you, right? And so this is very important to do on a regular basis, but it's also very tricky to do in that getting the right data is not easy. If you've got a ticketing system, that would certainly be a place to start. And then interpreting the data is also a little tricky. So you've got to understand what you're looking at, and how do you interpret error codes? How do you really zoom in on the actual root cause of the issue? So it's an important thing to do, but also be aware that it's also not an easy thing to do. So moving further here to the next category, so we've looked at problem, and now you want to know how well you're responding to those problems. So you've got, so fundamentally response metrics capture how fast you're resolving your incidents. What is your response rate? What is your response time to problems? So again, you look at your ticket database, and you'll track what your resolution times are on average for your tickets, and the rate at which you're resolving them. They're both important, time as well as the rate at which you can close tickets. And also you look at, are you solving problems completely? Meaning, are there issues that you think you've solved, but they keep coming back up? So you look at, for example, ticket reopen rates for specific types of tickets. And then you also look at am I getting tickets in the same problem area? That would tell you that there is an underlying problem that you really haven't quite fixed yet, and it keeps coming back. Right. So again, it's an important thing to do to track response metrics, but difficult to do as well. So really, getting at the right data sources is really the challenge there. And moving further here to the last category of service delivery metrics is capacity and cost. And fundamentally what this gets at is, are you getting bang for your buck? Right? That's really the core question it answers. I mean, you made investments in building, buying servers, storage, network equipment, and you're delivering a certain types of services to your end customer. But are you using those resources effectively, right? And then also, are you going to need more, and when are you going to need more? Right? Just having a sense of what your demand is, and what you're projecting that you'll need, so that you can add more capacity in time. And then increasingly more, this is going to be more important with public cloud, is you need to know what your services are costing you, because you've got another option in the public cloud that if you for certain kinds of workloads, for certain kinds of scenarios, it may be cheaper to go to the public cloud. So you need to know what your services are costing you in terms of the services that you're delivering. Now, I want to be careful in calling out that this just knowing what your resources are costing you is not the same thing as doing chargeback or formal bill back to your lines of business. That's more of a process level question, and Eric may cover that a little bit in the process section. What I'm talking about here is just for you internally as the IT team, to really have visibility into what your cost base is, regardless of whether you choose to show that back to your end customer. This is just for you to understand what your services are costing you. Right, so there's, in terms of the specific metrics you'd look at to get at this would be resource utilization. It's the simplest metric. You look at how well your servers are utilized. Are they underutilized, overutilized? Likewise, for you've got switch interfaces and router interfaces, and you've got if you bought a bigger switch than you need, you've got, let's say 50% of your ports are just unused. That's important to know. And then with cloud, you've got virtual machines that you can just spin up easily, and you can end up with VM sprawl, and VM sprawl costs you, whether it's private or public cloud. VM sprawl, every VM that's running there, sitting there, not being used, is costing you money. Right? So you need to understand if you've got a sprawl problem. And on the demand side, you need to know what resource demands you can expect in the next month, the next quarter, so that you don't want to be caught off guard in that you've got demand coming in for new projects and you're not able to satisfy that demand, or vice versa, you just run out of resources with current demand. Right? And then hardware costs, will help you get a basis for your costs, and then the thing that you need to do beyond that is to understand, do some accounting on how your different services are using resources. So you need to know, let's say, for example, if you're offering large virtual machines or large instances versus small instances, you need to have a sense of who's using how much, or how these different types of resources are using up your infrastructure. So that's the capacity and cost side of the equation. So what I'm going to do here is hand it over to Eric. So Eric is going to now talk about how you apply these metrics from a process standpoint, from a best practice standpoint, in optimizing your service delivery. So,
thank you, Mahesh. Okay, so yeah, thank you for that solid grounding in the nitty-gritty. So let's talk a bit about the process for measuring IT metrics and also best practices that have been identified in the industry, in particular by some of our friends at Gartner Inc. Okay, so one thing for us all to be aware of is that studies have shown that high-performing organizations are metrics-driven. So below average performing organizations show a lower rate of using IT metrics across the board. And Gartner did a study in which they asked IT organizations to rate themselves either as, and of course this is confidential, either as below average performers, or top performers, and then they also, the organization respondents then also rated their organizations on the extent to which they used various kinds of metrics. And the striking finding was that below average performing organizations used metrics to a lower extent across the board, but the difference was most noticeable in the area of external metrics, either IT measuring its actual contribution to the business outcome, so its service to external consumers, be they the organization itself or external customers, or comparing itself via benchmarks against others in the industry. So, as you're probably already aware, you can't manage what you can't measure, and organizations that are performing really well do a very good job of measuring everything that matters. All right, so the next thing to be aware of is that it's critically important for the IT organization to get ahead of metrics and measurement, and to proactively define what it thinks matters in terms of metrics, and then articulate that to the rest of the organization. Kurt Potter analyzed what happened in IT organizations when they proactively defined and provided metrics of performance to the rest of the organization versus what happened when the rest of the organization came to IT and demanded metrics. And there was a clear pattern in terms of if the IT organization faces an external demand for metrics where they hadn't been provided before, it's already too late. Something has gone wrong. The external customers in the rest of the organization or elsewhere are perceiving a problem, and at this point, IT will be playing catch-up, which is not anywhere you want to be. Gathering data for benchmarking takes time, and if IT has to do that reactively in response to demand instead of proactively, the delay, the unavoidable delay in defining and gathering metrics will harm the credibility of the data that's finally delivered. And also, any metrics that are delivered fresh without a historical baseline to compare against will be questioned. So agreeing as an organization inside IT and in the rest of the organization on what the right metrics are and achieving apples-to-apples comparisons, particularly in the area of external benchmarking, takes time. So it's something that IT wants to be driving instead of being driven to do. So let's talk a little bit about the process of defining metrics and then measuring them. This should probably be familiar to everyone. First, you have to develop a portfolio of the services you're offering and your SLAs. And of course, then ask yourself, are we making our SLAs? If so, great, you're in good shape. You can go look for new ways to measure yourself and improve your performance going forward. But if not, then the next step is to go and look at what processes are actually involved in offering the services. Do you know that or not? If not, then you've got to map the services you're offering to the fulfillment processes that support them, and then return to just identifying the outcomes of the processes. If you've got that defined, great. If not, then first measure your process outcomes. Once that set of activities is done, then you can turn around to identify the reasons that you're not meeting your SLAs. So you can identify the processes at fault, instrument them, figure out what the breaks in them or the bottlenecks are, resolve them, and then return once again to the process of analyzing whether you're now making your SLAs. So the thing to keep in mind is that the emergence of cloud-based services is putting a new degree of pressure on IT from a number of different aspects. One is that IT needs to offer services that are at least as easy to use as the alternatives that line of business professionals can find just through publicly available software as a service solutions. Otherwise, the line of business professionals may just do their own thing, provision things themselves, and expense it, which causes IT to lose control over the procurement of services and probably leads to inefficiency in procurement across the organization. So the line of business now has a choice between internally provided services and cloud-based services. Top-performing IT organizations are recognizing that and competing on ease of use as well as cost with externally available services. So one way this is emerging is making service available through a self-service catalog so that line of business professionals can request the services they need through a catalog when they need them and get them in a pretty much on-demand fashion. This is definitely a best practice. And we're seeing more and more, at Vistara, we're seeing more and more of our customers talking about this as the direction they're taking their organizations. So for a line of business professional to be able to make a rational choice in procuring a service, they've got to understand not just what the service is, but also what the cost of that service will be to the line of business if you're doing chargebacks, or to the organization as a whole if you're just doing cost allocation and showbacks, which is still more common. And it's also critical that a line of business understand not just the costs they're going to be charged, but also what they're getting for that service. Because often IT organizations have evolved over time to offer very high levels of security, very high levels of availability, very high levels of customization, and inevitably, because that was the kind of service that the line of business was demanding, and inevitably those kinds of characteristics drive higher costs. So a line of business professional needs to understand that if they're procuring an external service at 1/3 the cost, they may not necessarily be getting quite the same level of service that they've become accustomed to on the internal services. So clear communication of both what the cost is and what you're getting for that cost is critical in offering services through a user interface like a service catalog, particularly if you're empowering the line of business to make decisions about spinning up VMs and the like on their own. Okay, so how does IT get ready for service pricing? So there's, unfortunately, a pretty significant accounting exercise involved here, as if IT professionals don't have enough to do already managing technology and services. Now there's going to be increased focus on trying to accurately allocate the cost of services across different services and applications and business units so that the company as a whole is making rational decisions and accurately understanding where it's spending its money and why, and whether it's the allocation of funds makes sense. So Gartner identified the following 6 steps for an IT organization to get ready for offering service-based pricing to the rest of its constituents. The first is that the IT organization itself has to understand the benefits of service pricing and why the transition to this approach to offering services and charging for them is taking place. And then there's got to be a list of IT services that's been validated with and agreed upon with the line of business. So there's clear agreement between both sides on what services will be made available and measured. Then it's got to be possible to compare the prices of the services being offered with market prices. Otherwise, IT may face a potentially groundless accusation that their prices are too high due to apples to oranges comparisons. Next, there's got to be a business case approved for making this transition, because this will be a non-trivial exercise to accurately allocate your costs across services. I mean, there are interesting issues related to how do you allocate the cost of shared infrastructure. Is that done on a per-person basis across your organization or a per-transaction basis? There has to be agreement on how the costs will be allocated. IT has to have a chart of accounts to enable pricing. And then the organization needs to understand the resources that will be needed for this kind of service-based price initiative to succeed. And there are some additional metrics that the organization needs to take into consideration when it's evaluating the value provided by cloud-based services. Cloud-based services have some additional benefits that traditional on-premise infrastructure has often struggled to offer. One is potential for agility. It may be possible for cloud-based services to respond more quickly or even in real time to changes in business needs and demand patterns. And another one particularly available from the public cloud is elasticity. So obviously any on-premise service is going to have a finite upper capacity. But when you are a organization, particularly a smaller one, procuring services from a public cloud, the available capacity may effectively be infinite when compared with the actual real-world demand that a application is going to encounter. So the public cloud can offer seemingly infinite upward scalability, as well as the ability to scale capacity downward if the demand for a particular service drops drastically for some reason. So you can both reduce the risk of outages through seemingly infinite upward scalability, as well as reduce inefficient use of resources by being able to reduce the amount of resources you're consuming when demand is lower than expected or drops. Continuity is another one. So you're obviously going to want to carefully measure services on the maximum time between interruptions, regardless of where you're sourcing them from. And that includes our scheduled interruptions. Anticipated, and is that acceptable? When are they scheduled? How often do they take place? And so on. And finally, consistency. Is it possible to reduce variations in service levels so that you achieve a more consistent quality of service across different activities? Okay, so what can Vistara do to help IT in making these transitions to cloud-based services? So first of all, Vistara collects the relevant data about the infrastructure you're using to power these services, whether it is on-premise, private cloud, public cloud. Vistara is able to, it's got hundreds of built-in monitoring templates, so it can collect all the relevant metrics across your servers, your applications, your storage solutions, and your network devices. Vistara also has built-in analytics that automatically crunch that data to extract the information that's most relevant to IT organizations in evaluating performance and reliability and uptime, scalability, capacity, growth in utilization, and so on. Then it's also got standard reports built in. So we have management reports that synthesize the most relevant, most widely used metrics that are of interest to executive sponsors and automatically produce presentations for you. So it's easy to have a monthly discussion with your executive sponsors about the state of your services. Also, it's not enough just to measure. You also need to be able to take action. So Vistara is not just for monitoring, but also for management, and gives you a single tool that allows you to manage the entire system in response to what you learn from monitoring the metrics. So Vistara also gives you the ability to present your services through a service catalog. You can offer services to internal customers as well as to external customers, and you can embed a cost model to drive rational choices by IT in the line of business. Here's just a screenshot of an example service catalog by which line of business professionals can provision new resources on demand. So, Mahesh, any final thoughts on other things that I mentioned during the best practices and process session?
So just a few thoughts, just recap how we see it here at Vistara. As we talked about earlier, public cloud is a potent new force that is going to have a deep impact in the way enterprise IT will operate. It will impact all of you, all of us. And the metrics that we talked about today are important for IT to get a handle on how well the services that they deliver compare against the alternatives that lines of business will increasingly have with the public cloud. We at Vistara have this goal. Our goal here is to help you make it easy to collect, measure, and track and analyze the metrics that matter to you. And so we'll definitely you can count on Vistara for those sets of capabilities. And there is a process that goes along with it, and some of what Eric spoke about really speaks to the best practices and the process that you need to put together to apply these metrics. And so, we will enable you to get to a metric-driven management approach, and we think it'll be important, and we hope our product helps you get there.
Okay, well, listen, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up at this point. Thank you, everyone, for dialing in. Please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like a demonstration of Vistara. We're happy to do that at any time. And also, you can find more information at vistarait.com, including a list of demos of our product. Will be growing over the coming weeks. Thank you very much again for this webinar, and look for us to announce future webinars upcoming soon.